Webalearaali is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Hello, this is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond. Kizito. Good evening. On Spectrum tonight, unpacking the Public Order Management Bill. What explains the uproar about this proposed law? On the 25th of October this year, a bill entitled the Public Order Management Bill was tabled in Parliament, proposing several measures ostensibly to help the police effectively manage public gatherings. Those opposed to this bill say it gives sweeping powers to the police and the Minister for Internal Affairs to limit fundamental rights and freedoms of Ugandans. These rights, they say, include the right to associate, assemble, and that of demonstrating. The government and the police on the other side argue that much as these rights need to be respected, it's necessary to control gatherings to ensure that the rights of other people are protected. The government has also argued that it cannot allow demonstrations to be carried out unabated, saying that in the recent past, demonstrations organized under the banner of peace have turned into riots, leading to the destruction of property. The proposed bill gives powers to the police to sanction any gathering of 3 or more people and also gives the minister powers to decide the venue of any public gathering. This bill has since been referred to the Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee for scrutiny before being brought back to the floor of Parliament for debate and possible enactment. The proposed law comes at a time when what many are referring to as the Arab Spring is sweeping across the Middle East specifically, and as of today, huge demonstrations against the Egyptian Military Council are underway. So tonight we seek to understand just how bad the proposed law is, and if at all it warrants the uproar that we are now hearing. Our guest tonight, Mr. Solomon Webalearaali, Executive Director at Street Law Uganda. You're most welcome, Mr. Araali.
Thank you, Edmond. Good evening, listeners.
We also are joined by Mr. Kintu Nyago, Deputy Principal Private Secretary to the President. You're most welcome, Mr. Nyago.
Good evening, listeners. Good evening, Edmond.
I'll first of all start by, I would like you first of all tell us a little bit about your organization, Mr. Araali. Executive, this Street Law Uganda, what exactly does it do?
Well, street law does not deal with the street children, as many people have interpreted the organization to mean. Street law comes from the English concept of the man on the street, but using modern parlance, now we could talk of the person on the street, the ordinary person, or in Uganda here what we call the common man. It addresses those aspects of the law which touch on the lives of ordinary people in their daily lives. An example is if you're arrested by the police, an ordinary man, and you cannot afford the services of a lawyer, what are your rights? What can you do? When it comes to bail as an ordinary person, you can't afford a lawyer. What can you do to get bail? Fundamental rights, what do they mean to an ordinary person? So we go outside there to the public and explain to them, what the law is like and what it can do for them. And of late we have also been giving legal aid, free legal representation to people charged with politically related offences.
All right, Mr. Nyago, can you give us the justification for this of the Public Order Management Bill?
Thank you. Edmond, to begin with, there's no uproar. Well, I'm sure some people don't feel uneasy about the bill, but I don't think that the nation as a whole of 30 million Ugandans are appalled by this bill. Secondly, this bill does not suggest in its spirit or content to give sweeping powers to government or to the Inspector General of Government or to the Minister of Internal Affairs or to anybody for that matter in government. I do remember under Obote 2 and Obote 1 when there were detention orders. Those really gave sweeping powers, and there was hardly any debate about their being put in place. And but now, as you can see, we are debating this bill, and the debate is going on, and I'm sure it's being improved by the day. Now, rights, nobody's rights are going to be infringed upon. Because, look, so we talk about freedom of assembly. I mean, the bill itself mentions that, say, social gatherings, religious gatherings, or gatherings of political parties when they're having their conventions can take place freely. So long as, I mean, it's not a gathering in a public place that's in public. Now, the issue of some people seem to equate very erroneously anarchy with democracy, because anarchy is the situation whereby there's no regulation, and then it's everybody for himself and God for us all. That's anarchy. If they want to try anarchy, let them go to Somalia or Eastern DRC, and they would see what takes place there. Some of the most unenviable places on this planet. Now, there is no democracy without regulation. The question is, what type of regulation? And as I've just indicated, the kind of regulation being proposed is democratic regulation, because there's a constitution in place. And there's no bill or there's no act of parliament that's going to come from this parliament that would be against the spirit and the wording of the constitution. And the constitution we have is one of the best in the world. Very democratic, very liberal. However, as I've just mentioned, there is anarchy and democracy are the exact opposite. Even in America, in the United States, for example, to touch a policeman, that's very serious offense. Just touching a policeman on duty. But here, a man like this just kicking policemen, senior policemen, not just touching them, but kicking them. Oh, let's take the walk to work. If it was walking to work, why didn't Bessie walk in his very vast farm of about 100 acres and then opted to walk in informal settlements where people are having small petty businesses?
He was going to Najanankum.
Well, that's why there's need for regulation. A wealthy man like Bessie to walk amidst the wretched of the poor, to disrupt their very sources of livelihood. I mean, we can't allow that in an orderly society that's democratic. Democracy is not only for the rich. Democracy is for all Ugandans, whether you own 100 acres in Kasangati or you work in an informal settlement in Kasangati township.
Mr. Araali, what's your argument? What's your hatred, beef against this law, like they say these days?
Well, Edmond, I'm in agreement with Mr. Kintu Nyago that there is no such a thing as unregulated democracy. And indeed, there are no absolute rights. But in this case, and a big but, when the regulations to regulate democracy are meant to negate democracy, then they cease to be well-intentioned. So it is in the same spirit that this law actually is brought in bad faith and a reflection of bad politics, and further a reflection of the style of the NRM government, that whenever it is faced with criticism, whenever it is faced with a question of debate, instead of saying, okay, let's sit down and listen to each other and debate, it prefers to use the law to stiff for debate. It prefers to use the law to silence people. In 1986, there was a lot of criticism from the public on why there were so many foreigners in the army. Now, instead of the NRM saying, okay, let's debate, we happen to have so many foreigners in the army because of the history of the struggle.
Yes.
Here was the UPC regime, which was repressing the Rwandese, telling them to go to a place where they were likely to meet danger. So what they did was to ally with people in the bush for a common cause, and that is to struggle for a democratic space. You explained, and the people would have understood. Recently, Mr. Nyago is referring to walk-to-work protests.
Let's first get that bit of history. what the NRM did was to bring the anti-sectarianism law instead of giving the kind of explanation.
Exactly. The reply was bring the anti-sectarian law and criticize,
which has not been used much anyway.
And I think the only two instances where it has been used is when somebody referred some people as Ugandese. So
it was a custom-made law.
Legislation didn't have to come in really. Political discussion would have solved that problem. Same thing, there is work-to-work demonstrations. Now, instead of the government addressing the work-to-work related problems and says, let's debate. What are they on economic issues? I agree, these economic issues are affecting many parts of the world. But what are other countries doing? They're trying to give those political questions, political answers. But now, for us, you say, no, we shall put in place a law to deny demonstrators the right to demonstrate. Now, it is in the same spirit that, of late, many Ugandans have come out in a spirited fight to exercise their right of freedom of association, to actively participate in the democratic governance of this country by criticizing some actions of the government. Through holding rallies, through holding workshops. Now, what does the government say? No, we shall limit these discussions by deciding which discussion to allow and which discussion not
to allow. All right, we'll go a little deeper into the specific provisions of that law. Let's first of all get a reaction from Mr. Nyago.
Look, I'm certain that the government led and the organization led by President Museveni has never stifled debate, has neither shied away from any debate nor stifled any debate. Look, the anti-sectarian law must be understood from the context of our history. This is a country with a history of xenophobia. For instance, in 1972, Idi Amin had a dream and chased away Ugandan Asians. You see? I do remember of slogans like, a good Muganda is a dead one. These are not figments of my imagination. These are realities of our history. So against the background, nobody, Mr. Museveni, with the kind of responsibility and the moral attitude he has towards politics, couldn't have just sat down when people were beginning to peddle xenophobia. Secondly, on the issue of, for instance, sitting down and debating, what Ugandans are famous for now is debate, as we are doing now. This law is not being imposed on this parliament or on our society. The law is in parliament, the bill is in parliament, and any Ugandan, as we are doing now, is free to debate this law. So it's not being imposed, like, for example, the pigeonhole constitution that Mr. Obote woke up one day, possibly having taken a glass of whiskey with Mr. Bina Isa, and imposed an entire constitution in the country. And also, the issue of what do other countries do? Well, I do remember Mr. Cameron, who has been very keen to quantify about how people should practice human rights in other countries with conditionalities when there were riots in London. I do remember what he did. He imprisoned the rioters. The judiciary worked overtime, even over the weekends. No bail conditions were given to the rioters. So many countries do many different things, and in Uganda we have done none of these things. Like, say, what happens now in Egypt, where your people claim it's an Arab Spring. The last time I heard, about 50 people have been shot dead. Or in Syria, Uganda, I think, is behaving in a very civilized manner under President Museveni with these rioters and Mr. Weber engaged in the work to work.
Mr. Arel, can you give us some highlights of this bill?
Well, probably if I go to the highlights, let me address the issues which Mr. Nyago has raised. He's saying that this bill is not imposed on the people of Uganda. It is going to be debated.
It is being debated
in Parliament.
Yes.
But you see, there are so many ways of imposing. Because what normally happens in our Parliament here, when some people, express opposition to or take the debate in the direction which NRM doesn't like, the president calls the caucus.
Yes.
And they, people are told, you're either with us or against us. In other words, those who are not in the NRM direction, that is a way really of imposing the will of the executive on the parliament. Anyway, among the highlights, some aspects of this bill are unconstitutional in as far as they tend to reverse the decision of the Constitutional Court. This bill, intends to reverse the achievements made in removing that provision in the Police Act,
yes,
which provided that before you can hold, that the Inspector General of Police,
yes, has to be told.
Has to be told. The Constitutional Court came in and said, no, this is unconstitutional.
Yes.
It encroaches on the freedoms of other people.
Yes.
Now, what the government is doing,
they're bringing it back.
They're bringing it back.
Dressed in another dress.
Dressed in another dress. And the Constitution is very clear on that kind of approach. Article 92 of the Constitution reads, restriction on retrospective legislation. Parliament shall not pass any law to alter the decision or judgment of any courts between the parties to the decision or judgment.
So this bill is unconstitutional.
This bill, not the entire bill.
Yes.
That provision of the bill,
right,
which tries to bring by the back door the provision which was removed in the Police Act.
Yes.
So that is one aspect. The other aspect is the bill touches on attempts to remove fundamental rights of Ugandans as far as freedom of assembly is concerned, as far as freedom of association is concerned, freedom of movement is concerned. Here's a scenario. The people of Uganda want to hold a rally to discuss the effectiveness of governance.
Yes.
And they are going, now they have to seek permission from
the Inspector General.
The Inspector General of the Police. Now, some of the issues they are going to discuss affect the manner in which the Inspector of the General Police has been, operating.
Yes.
And now, you're going to seek
his permission.
His permission. In other words, he's now in this case being
a judge in his own case.
A judge, prosecutor, executor in his own case.
Right.
In the first instance,
yes,
when you go to him to ask for permission, he can grant it or deny it.
Right.
And when he denies it, you can make an appeal. To do appeal to the same Inspector General of Police.
Yes.
And he can deny it. But if you go ahead and hold it, against his permission, what does he do? He's given the authority to disperse. So it makes it, quite ridiculous.
Right.
That is one. Two.
Very briefly, we have to go for a break. Yes.
Presently, the Uganda police actually is seen as an instrument of the ruling party.
Yes.
The president himself has made it clear by saying
the IGP is a good card.
Is a good card. So you're giving powers to the executive to
yes,
to limit
the freedoms of the opposition.
The freedoms of
the opposition. This is Spectrum of Radio 1. We're going for a break. We'll be back tonight. Unpacking the Public Order Management Bill. What explains this uproar about this proposed law? We'll be back. Don't go away.
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also helped friends, seeing potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He's just who he is. Special.
So here's to men like John,
who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the sauce. Nile Special, you've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Is your internet provider turning your world upside down? Broadband Company offers fast and reliable internet solutions. And for the first 100 subscribers this month, we offer zero connection fees. Save up to 400,000. For more information on these offers, call toll-free 0800 222 111.
Broadband Company, more than you expect.
The energy god, Alpha Man from Jamaica, is gonna rock a party that goes down. Let's get physical! No linger. Elephant Man is gonna rock hella air on Friday 2nd Dash 2011 and the Go Cricket Over at 25k ordinary and 75k VIP. Gets open at 6 p.m. Introducing the energy god, Elephant Man! Elephant Jams! Elephant Man is gonna surprise Kela Air with 2 surprise DJs. And now, ladies and gentlemen, there's no other ad for this. You has to be there.
Yep. Good to go.
Elephant Man in Uganda is brought to you by Kamuka Property Consultants. Challenge the tours and travel. The red pepper. Smell of fun. Don't wish you were there. Be fair. Excessive consumption of alcohol is harmful to your health. Strictly not for sale to persons under 18 years. Please drink responsibly. And clap.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Indeed, welcome back. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight, Unpacking the Public Order Management Bill. What explains the uproar about this proposed law? Our guests tonight, Mr. Solomon Webalearaali, Executive Director at Street Law Uganda, and Mr. Kintu Nyago, Deputy Principal Private Secretary to the President. Mr. Nyago, yes. Some people think it's a reaction to the walk to work, which some people think is going to become, a spillover of the Arab Springs.
Well, I don't know what's happening in Arabia apart from a whole kind of mess. But that said, that's the beauty of debate, because Uganda is a democracy. I mean, if Mr. Webalearaali is coming up with what he sees are weaknesses in the law, I mean, that's the democracy we have in this country. And, well, his views should be best presented to the parliamentary committee, and in case they have merit, I mean, people, Ugandans are rational people, our leaders are rational people, I'm sure they will be adopted. It is not true to say that the police is just an extension of the party, of the ruling party. Well, the fact may be that possibly up to 80% or so of most of Ugandans support the movement, but that doesn't mean that the police force is because look, let's take, as I've mentioned, in the United States, touching a policeman, say a white policeman, if you're a black man, they will just shoot you dead. Touching him, say, in a kind of scuffle, they will shoot you dead. But here, Mr. Vesigi was kicking commissioners of police, not sergeants, not police sergeants. So had the police been a partisan, kind of Gestapo type, like say Nazi Germany, kind of police, he would have been a dead man by long ago. I mean,
when they tried to arrest him, he kicked back.
Oh yes, that's what he did. Kicked back, slapped people, abused them.
And you say they should have shot him.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in Nazi Germany, for instance, where they had a police which was a Nazi police, you couldn't have done that kind of thing. Or in America, where they say the NYPD or some of those police, whatever departments in the southern very conservative states, you can't do that kind of thing. But here our police are very polite, very civil, and respect the law regardless of who you are. That's an extreme example which should highlight the point that this police is very professional. Now, as a matter of fact, there's no uproar. Because look, 1 or 2 NGOs and some, people...
Amnesty International is one of those 1 or 2.
Oh, yeah, why not? I mean, so what? Amnesty International is an NGO, and
Street Law Uganda.
It's even a non-Ugandan NGO. So 1 or 2, they are possibly have their own Western-centric phobias and whatever. So the point is, look, it's in Britain where they come from. Can you do anything without consulting the police?
Well, it's an international group. It's not.
No, but they are based in London, and they are formed by
their head office. They could be headquartered.
Mr. Bernstein was based in London. So the point is, can you do anything on Trafalgar Square or whatever without, or can you just walk to, say, Windsor Castle or whatever, where the Queen stays, or without permission of the police? You can't. Can you block, for example, Oxford Street, like basically you're trying to block Kampala Road here, and nothing happens to you? You can't. There is no uproar.